All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Nicholas Herman. I'm the Lawrence J. Schoenberg Curator at the Schoenberg Institute for Manuscript Studies at the University of Pennsylvania. And it's a pleasure today to welcome you to this month's virtual lecture at the Schoenberg Institute. And I'm accompanied by my friend and colleague, Dot Porter, our Curator of Digital Humanities, who will introduce our speaker, Suzette Van Haaren, in just a minute. Before that, and while people are joining and logging in, I just want to remind our audience about some upcoming initiatives and programs at SIMS. Most importantly of all, next month, of course, November is the month in which we hold our annual Schoenberg Symposium on Manuscript Studies in the Digital Age. This year, our theme is circulation, so examining the circulation of manuscripts in the time of their creation, afterwards in more modern times, and also the circulation of data and information about manuscripts. The symposium is being held this year, November 21st to 23rd, in person in Philadelphia at the Kislak Center. And also online. Please register whether you plan to attend in person or online, and we look forward to seeing you there. The event begins on the evening of November 21st with a keynote by Lisa Fagan Davis. So we're all looking forward to that. In addition to that, in November, in December 6th, we have our next online lecture with Pira Panarut from the Center for the Study of Manuscript Cultures in Hamburg, and who was also a SIMS visiting research fellow. That lecture is on peculiar paracontents from Thai chanting books, a case study of manuscripts from Philadelphia. Also a reminder about Coffee with a Codex every week, Thursday at noon EST, a drop-in 30-minute viewing of a manuscript with Dot and special guests, and also the exhibition Movement of Books on site at the Kislak Center on the 6th floor of Van Pelt Library, which is continuing until December 13th. And to keep up with all of these events, please do sign up for our newsletter if you're not already signed up, which you can do on our website, schoenberginstitute.org. So welcome, everyone, and I will now turn things over to Dot, who will introduce this afternoon's speaker.
Thank you, Nick. I am very pleased to welcome Dr. Suzette Van Haaren to present today's SIMS online lecture. Suzette is currently postdoctoral researcher in the subproject Virtual Middle Ages, Virtuelles Mittelalter, within the Sonderforschungsbereich 1567 Virtuelle Lebenswelten at the Ruhr-Uni Bochum. Through this project, Suzette is digging deep into what it means to digitize medieval objects, a topic that is dear to my own heart, and I know to many of yours as well. In general, Suzette is interested in the changing function of medieval cultural objects in regards to the growing influence of digital technology. She completed her PhD in 2022 at the University of Groningen and the University of St. Andrews in manuscript studies, digital media studies, and art history, with her dissertation, The Digital Medieval Manuscript: Approaches to Codicology, which I have just found out will be published with Brill next year. So congratulations for that, Suzette. She is informally published on a wide range of topics, including the memification of the Middle Ages in social media, reflectance transformation imaging, or RTI, and physical distancing from manuscripts and the presence of the digital facsimile. I got to know Suzette when she was at Penn earlier this year for her SIMS visiting fellowship, the results of which she'll be presenting on today. While she was here, she jumped in and made herself a vital part of the SIMS community, even though she was only here for a short period of time. Among many other experiences and conversations we had during her visit, oh, sorry, I skipped a line. And I will forever have fond memories of her helping me out during Coffee with a Codex, among many other experiences and conversations we had during her visit. While preparing this introduction, I had to do a little research, and when I Googled her name, I discovered online the propositions of her dissertation, which she tells me is a tradition in the Netherlands where the student prepares a list of statements about the dissertation work that the committee can reference during the defense. There was one in particular that stood out to me, and as I pass the virtual mic to Suzette, I would like us all to keep this one in mind. An image on a screen will never be a replacement of a loved one, but seeing their encouraging smile on a phone screen can offer a feeling of presence. Suzette.
Thanks so much for the introduction. That last preposition is always, they always call it the fun one. I think I have another fun one, I guess. But this obviously, I wrote my PhD for a big part was during COVID. And I lived in the UK while my family were in the Netherlands. So this was obviously a bit of a reference to that as well, but also relates to digital manuscripts. Let me start my presentation. I'll share my screen. I have PowerPoint. Oop. There we go. All right. I would like to thank you again for inviting me. Thanks to Lynn in particular, who couldn't be here today, but I know, she invited me. So I think today is a nice opportunity for me to get some of my tentative results of the research that I did at SIMS onto paper, which will be kind of the start of an article, hopefully on this topic. As Dot already said, I was the SIMS fellow in April of this year. I was fellow with this research project, which was a research project on VisColl. So I was looking at the workings of this digital tool and talking to the developers, Dot and Alberto, who are both listening to this talk. So it's a bit strange talking about their own tool. But we'll see. We'll have a chat about it after I'm done with this talk. And one of the most important parts of this research was that I talked to the users of the digital tool. So all of this happens within my research project as a postdoc at the Ruhr-Universität in Bochum, which Dot already said is my project Virtual Middle Ages. Within the Sonderforschungsbereich, which means Collaborative Research Center, Virtual Worlds. So for my postdoc project, and in general, I'm interested in the development of technological innovations and their impact on how research is conducted, specifically in my field of medieval studies and manuscript studies. So I look at how we perform research in digital environments, how this forms new kinds of digital research objects, and how this then is changing how knowledge is created and how the Middle Ages are imagined in contemporary history writing and culture. So the word virtual may be a little bit confusing. It definitely is for the people working at my research center. We always have discussions about it. So I'll say this about it. In my research particularly, I do not mean virtual reality technology. So I use the term to explore practices of history writing that includes notions of curation, infrastructures, knowledge production, imagination, and world building. And I'll be talking a little bit about that today as well, obviously, because this is part of my postdoc. So virtual history or virtual Middle Ages is a framework that I'm developing to think about knowledge production and writing history. It is about the way that history always in a sense requires imagination as well as being based on factual things. So I'm looking at how historical analysis and history writing is a way of shaping the narrative of history. And then kind of the question that is always in the back of my mind, my eventual and unanswerable question, I know this, is how does the increasing digitization of research and cultural heritage change the way history is shaped? But that is just for context. This is just the context in which the research project at SIMS was developed. So in terms of VisColl, my question is, what does it mean for the manuscript researcher to create their own research object in online space? And what does this do for knowledge production and my concept of virtual history? And I've a kind of a small hypothesis, and we'll see how I get there, or if I get there. But the hypothesis is the translation of medieval material into digital models and metadata creates entirely new digital objects, establishes a whole different material engagement between scholar and research object, and consequently a shift in how knowledge about the Middle Ages is created. So, what is VisColl? I assume quite a lot of you may already know what VisColl is, but I will also just assume that a lot of people don't know, so it may be a bit double information for a few of you. For that, I'm already apologizing, but this is just the way that I'm going to talk about it. So VisColl is a digital tool that was developed at SIMS by Dot Porta and Alberto Campagnolo, both of whom are also listening now, and Douglas Emery as the technical brains, among which a lot of other people as well. And the digital tool is meant for people who work with manuscripts to visualize VisCollations. Cool, there we go. I also speak, or I specifically actually speak about VC Editor. VC Editor is the software, so the VisColl editor. I'll talk about this much more later, but first I'll go into how my talk for today is structured. So, since I have quite a bit of time this afternoon, or in my case this evening, I want to do quite a deep dive into my research. So my research consists of basically two parts, which is the theoretical part and the practical part. Before I start this though, I'll go into the research method that I applied for my research at VisColl, at SIMS. So this was a threefold research method, right? I had theory, I had my personal experience, and I also did interviews. Yes, I'm a medievalist. Yes, I also do interviews. I know this is a little bit strange for medievalists usually, but you'll see that this, for me, is actually very, very purposeful. So talking about my personal experience, which I call autoethnography, when I was at SIMS, I have built VisColl models while working together with the developers of VC Editor. And this kind of allowed me to better understand the tool from a user perspective, which helps me to describe the technological possibilities and restraints of it. And then the ethnography of the research community. I have interviewed 7 manuscript scholars in different stages of their career, who all work with VC Editor. These were semi-structured interviews that I performed over Zoom. Each of them were an hour to an hour and a half long, so quite long. And I asked the interviewees to share their screen so that I could see what they were doing in the tool. 3 of these people were from the US, 2 from Germany, and 2 from the Netherlands. And the interviews were conducted in English and in Dutch. The interviews are blind. That is, the participants are not disclosed in my research output. However, I do realize that this is a very small field. So even me discussing their work may reveal who I interviewed, but still, I will not make any explicit statements about this. All right. I'll start by talking about the theory. Just so I can set up a nice framework for for how I'm going to analyze VisColl. So what am I interested in? I am looking at how medievalists shape their research practices. And this is a process of the creation of knowledge. So I'm looking at the relationship between the scholar and its research objects. And by research objects, I mean both medieval manuscripts, but also the digital medieval manuscript that they work with. So I just wanted to put this picture out there. It doesn't really have anything to do with the theory that I'll be talking about, but this was my workspace while I was working at Sims. You can see here I'm working with this beautiful manuscript. On my laptop, you see VC Editor open and the digital facsimile next to it. I just like it as an image, I guess, and it's a nice illustration of what I'm talking about. Right. So getting back to theory. In a broad sense, I'm interested in how understanding how knowledge is formed in contemporary research communities. So looking at medievalist research through a kind of sociological lens. So how does writing history change in the light of digitization and the use of digital tools? I guess it's quite generally accepted that scientific facts are constructed. Right there, we can kind of imagine this scientist in a laboratory, and they're using microscopes to investigate their research object, and from that knowledge, they're kind of creating scientific ideas and scientific facts. But I also see this in humanities scholars' offices, in the library reading rooms, and obviously we use different tools to look at our research objects, like digital tools. So the narratives of history that we know are written by historians. And the problem with looking at history, looking at the Middle Ages, is that we can never look directly at the past. We can only indirectly look at the past, namely through historical sources. So the historical method is built out of a few steps. We look at historical sources, we ask questions of them, and we hypothesize. And from this hypothesis, we investigate the sources, and we kind of curate them in order for us to build this narrative. So based on historical material, we build a narrative that makes the most sense. And this then is what is shaping historical narrative, and thus the history that we know. And obviously the same goes for manuscript scholars, right? We wish to understand the history of manuscript making, who made these books and why, who used them, what was the journey they took before they came to the Kislak Center, for example. Now, technology and technological infrastructures have always significantly impacted scholarly activity. So think, for example, of photography that was invented in the 19th century, or microfilm that was very important in the 20th century and sometimes even still. So that reproduced medieval manuscripts. Digital technologies and digital tools nowadays are fundamental factors in scholarly activity, but we don't actually know that much about how they influence what medievalists do, and as a result, how they influence the narratives that we write. So kind of a grand statement maybe, but I am interested in how digital technologies affect how we shape the Middle Ages. And because it's quite grand, I'll keep it small right now and look at one particular digital tool, namely VisColl. And I have a small side note to that, because apart from how we use digital tools in research practices, I'm also really interested in how digital tools affect how manuscript scholars perform their research collaboratively. That is, what does it say about medievalists as a community of scholars? And I'll come back to that all the way at the end of my talk. But I think it's an important point. So as Dot said, about my PhD, and maybe some of you may know my work that I did during my PhD research, I think a lot about materiality. So materiality and medieval books and digitization. So the material of medieval books is extremely important in codicological analysis. I'm talking about the interaction between the scholar and the medieval manuscripts. So I am also really interested in how that translates into the digitization of medieval manuscripts, and in the end, how material engagement is constituted in digital research practices. So I'm interested in how people interact with things and how this changes the way we act and the way we think. Technologies, and definitely digital technologies, have caused changes in our way of doing things. And a very kind of basic example, for example, is how easy it is for me to use a mouse or to navigate a computer or to type on a keyboard, right? It is a tool that I learned to use at a very young age. And I, in primary school, had a typing course to learn how to type, but I'm doubting if children still need a typing course these days, because it's getting more and more ingrained in our kind of daily lives. So with that argument, I'm not just looking at the tools that we use, but also the practices and knowledge created in these processes. And I like the argument that Malafouris makes with his material engagement theory. And he says, we think with and through things. So this is looking at how people do their research in interaction with a digital tool. So the creation of knowledge is a process of relationality. The knowledge springs from the interaction between things, between tools, and humans. And this obviously is also the case for the digital tool, the apparatus, so the digital object. The scholar interacts with the digital tool and the digitization, and consequently creates a model in which knowledge is situated. The computational environment and the software are media for an active discovery and creative material engagement. So the digital models that are created in these digital tools are models of perceptions, ways of structuring and seeing the world. So these digital tools are important as scholarly intervention and scholarly interaction. The new reality of the medieval object, so the digital reality of the medieval object and its possibilities for digital doing, is where opportunities for contemporary scholarship lie. The digital facsimile is a tool that allows scholars to look at the medieval manuscript in different ways. And I'm quoting here Bill Enders, who wrote an article about digitization as scholarly intervention, which is forthcoming. And he says, digitization is a scholarly intervention that captures in digital form aspects of a manuscript's materiality. For any definition, scholarly intervention is key. It is the motivating force. Like all scholarly methods, a specific approach is chosen to generate leverage for knowing and make possible a specific intervention. So in his work, I very much like to align myself with Bill's work. He speaks of a broad form of scholarly intervention. So this includes practices by librarians, archivists, conservators, students, and scholars as well. So the digitization of medieval material, of medieval manuscripts, is a scholarly intervention in itself, and on top of that, it provides the research object that we deal with. So the medieval manuscript is not just a research object, but the digital medieval manuscript as well. So VisColl then is not only a tool for digitization, but also allows for the building of a kind of personalized research object. And with that, I come to the next phase of my talk. What is VisColl and what is VC Editor? Before I begin talking details about the digital tools, I see that we're with quite a few people, so I'm assuming that not everyone actually knows about manuscript collation or manuscript structure. So I've found this nice little video, short video by the Getty that explains how a manuscript is structured. And I'm hoping that for everyone the sound is working okay, but please do let me know somehow if it's not working. I'll just start the video.
The structure of a medieval manuscript. For more than 1,000 years, all books were written and illustrated by hand. By the Middle Ages, books were being made by taking sheets of parchment, folding them in half, and arranging them into short stacks called gatherings. Gatherings were joined side by side, sewn at the book's spine, and attached to covers to protect the book's content. Looking at the spine of a book can reveal its structure. A gathering is typically made called a bifolium. Half a bifolium is a folio. Each folio is assigned a unique number, which refers to its front and back, its recto and verso. When a book is assembled, its folios are in sequence. A good example of this can be seen by following a story illustrated in a single gathering. This story begins with St. Catherine, an early convert to Christianity. It continues with her ability to convert others, which angers the Roman emperor. Catherine is tortured, but survives. The story ends with St. Catherine's martyrdom and her body taken to Mount Sinai by angels. But if a book is not bound, its folios can seem out of order. Here you can see that the first and last illustrations were actually painted on the same piece of parchment. The structure of a book is a sophisticated feat of engineering that remains essentially the same today.
There we go. This is an introduction to manuscript collation and very basically shows how a manuscript is structured. But as you can see, maybe in this picture, it's not always easy. Specifically, it's often not easy at all. Medieval books are often have very complex structures, can contain all kinds of different quires, which is what we call a little stack of these bifolia. These quires can change, leaves can be cut out, manuscripts could consist of quires from multiple different books that were created. There's all kinds of variation that's going on. In this picture, you can beautifully see basically how these quires are bound together. So the structure of manuscript is important to understand, to find out about the history of its making, but also of its use and of its reuse. And the problem with digitization is that it doesn't show the structure of a manuscript. But as you can see, quite a long list. So this is the same manuscript, this picture, and this digitization. Am I correct? Yes. So it's kind of a long list of these separate pictures of photos, right? So how do you solve this problem where you want to communicate a structure, a collation, but you can't do it in this kind of, I would say, traditional digital form? When I was a student, I was getting a lot of headaches because I had to learn collation formulas and I had to write collation formulas and read them. And some of them are relatively easy to understand once you kind of know what you're doing. But as you can see from these examples that I took from the website of VisColl, I have no idea what number 5 said, to be honest. The problem with traditional collation formula is, first of all, often they're difficult to understand. And second of all, there's not really a standardized way of doing it. So either you're part of a kind of tradition and following kind of a standard, especially obviously when you're working in a library, or you kind of think about what is kind of the most logical way of doing it. Or in the case of number 5, possibly the, I don't know, most illogical way of doing it. And I already saw, sorry, Maase, that you in the chat asked for an introduction. So here I go. This is the introduction for VisColl. I'm sorry, I'm not seeing the chat while I'm talking. But here we go. Let me introduce VisColl to you. Because VisColl is kind of the idea of a solution for this problem of communicating these material aspects of the manuscripts. So it was created at SIMS, as I said already, as the brainchild of Dot Porter, who just very kindly introduced me, with the help of Alberto Campagnolo, who's a manuscript scholar with a background in book conservation, who's now in Leuven, and Doug Emery, the programmer at the library, and many others. I think you might be able to find them on the website as well. So because it has, because VisColl has gone through different developmental phases, people have been helping and going away as well. So VisColl started in 2013 and has gone through multiple phases, as I said. It was first an experimental tool, but now has established itself in the landscape of manuscript studies with scholars, teachers, conservators, and students. And a new developmental phase is coming because they were just granted a new grant, the National Endowment for the Humanities, Digital Humanities Advancement Grant, for the next 3 years of additional work. So I'm really looking forward to what's going to happen. As I understand it, VisColl is the underlying programming, and it is the pillar on which VC Editor, which is the software, is built. And VC Editor is the user-friendly software that allows people to put in the data about their manuscript and kind of build their own model of a manuscript. And my research with the scholars was focused on their use of VC Editor. So VisColl, this is what VC Editor looks like. VisColl is a tool for dynamic modeling of manuscript and other book material into both human and machine readable output. It is creating models and visualization to represent and to analyze the structure of medieval manuscripts. It is a tool that is created to produce a quite specific type of end product, a clear and complete encoded description of the structure of a medieval manuscript, as well as a visualization as an overview. And it used to be based in an environment that required quite a lot more programming on the user side, but it is now we have VC Editor. So it requires less programming. And I'll show you in a second. The digital tool is a way for producing abstract metadata out of the information that we have about a manuscript, which then can be used in all kinds of visualizations, representations, and analyses. So VC Editor was developed as an environment to make the experience more user-friendly, and I wanted to show you VC Editor, so I'll just open that up and switch my screen sharing. So 1 second. There we go. I hope you can all see my browser now. Here we go. This is what VC Editor looks like. This is my account. You can see all the projects that I did for Sims while I was there in April. And I'll just show you really easily. As you can see, I was already practicing today because I wanted to show you how to open kind of a new project, and you can see how the input is. And then I can show you around kind of the possibilities a little bit. So I'll click on new and create new. That's what we're doing. And I'll give this a title, very, not very unique, as you can see. So I'll give it Manuscript 1. And the Manuscript shelf mark is also MS1. Oh, it's all, I already used it. Should have deleted that test project anyway. And the manuscript date, I'll give it 1400. A nice date. So what I'll do here is pre-populate with quires, because I already know that my Manuscript 2 has 2 quires with 8 leaves each. This is quite a usual thing to do. A lot of people use the pre-populate with quires function when they're working. At least when I was doing the interviews, most people just did it like this. So here it asks you for the structure. I knew that I had 2 quires and each of them had 8 leaves. So I'll just do 8 and they're all conjoined. And here you can make some changes. So suddenly I remember, oh no, the second quire, actually the first leaf of that has been cut out. So I'll give it 7 leaves, and then I'm now realizing that if it's been cut out, I have to do this differently. So I'll just give it 8 leaves and I'll show you what to do when a leaf has been cut out. Anyway, I'll continue. Here you can add folio numbers, anything you want to change. Notation style as well. I like this, recto verso. And I'll go and open this new project that I made. So this is what the structure of my manuscript looks like. And as you can remember, I remembered that this leaf was actually missing. So I'll just put it in here and say type and click here, missing. So it changes the leaf into a missing leaf. I'll show you around one of my projects that I did for Sims, because I can show you a little bit more about the possibilities that VisColl has for mapping information on top of the structure that I already created. So let's go in here. So this is one of the models that I made for one of the manuscripts at Sims, that the picture you saw at the beginning of the talk. And as you can see here, I have a few quires. Here's a leaf missing, for example. And what I tended to do was to map information on top of it. And this mapping was which text started where. As you can see here, a different text starts here. And I also added information about the miniatures that are in there. And you can see that I also added the images with IIIF. Okay, I will go back to my PowerPoint. Where is it? There we go. I'm hoping you can all see this. I see there's a few messages in the chat, so I do hope that you also. Yeah, okay, good. Thanks. All right, so the digital tools of VisColl is meant as a solution for a very simple problem. The digitization of medieval manuscripts in terms of its photography and metadata description has no good representation of certain material qualities. Specifically, its 3-dimensionality and complex structures. In a way, the digital abstraction that VC Editor presents the manuscript in is an attempt to reconstruct material intricacies in digital form. It is also kind of a personalized research object that I've already talked about, a digital medieval manuscript that is created within the tool to serve the purpose of analysis. And there's a few personalizing features that I just talked about, right? The scholar can put in the information that they want, whatever they like, whatever they think is most important. So some people would never put in the texts, for example. Most importantly, although it was created with a specific goal in mind, the developers value its flexibility above all else. It can be and is used for many different purposes. And this shows in VC Editor, which is a user-friendly way of producing these models with an environment in which the user can map this information on top of the structure however they want. But according to the developers though, the XML models, which is what you're seeing here, are the most important output because they exist outside of any software dependence. So you can create this by exporting, using the export function in VC Editor. And this flexibility kind of also indicates sustainability and durability. So the models exist outside of a specific representation and can thus be formed into many different things. The metadata is fungible, creating a very dynamic digital object. And that means that I come to the last part of my talk, which is a little bit of an analysis of the interviews that I did with the scholars. So the next thing that I'll talk about is the information that I got from interviewing the users of VisColl. So I was most interested in how people describe their work and how they describe the process and their output. I will be showing quite a lot of quotes from people. And the quotes that I used are slightly edited to account for, you know, the little mistakes or the us and the as, the repetition that we all have when we speak. So that I make the quotes a little bit more intelligible. There's a few quotes in there that are translated from Dutch into English. These are just a few minor corrections that I did. So the users of VC Editor are looking to create visualizations of their manuscript's collation. So they're wanting a good and structured overview with additional information mapped on top. They would normally enter the data, the known data of the manuscript or the fragments that they were working on, from there kind of start shaping the model by adding information, changing the layout and adding images, etc. The visualizations are usually used as metadata for example, catalog entries or library catalogs. They're also used as research objects and sometimes even as a continuously growing repository for more and more information. It is also definitely used as a teaching tool to teach students to understand manuscripts better. So when talking to scholars, I identified 3 general ways of creating models to analyze and represent manuscripts. The first one is quite a straightforward model, right? They're the models that are made from the existing material, so to document what is there. And this was usually done by the librarians or the conservators and the restorers that I spoke to, right? They want to document exactly what they're seeing. Then there was the model that was kind of recreating a manuscript, specifically from fragments or fragmentary quires, sometimes even kept in different libraries. And these were usually the medievalist scholars, although they obviously also made the straightforward models. The recreated models are almost exclusively done by medievalist scholars. And then there were also people who started experimenting with more speculative models or thinking about the possible or probable constructions of medieval manuscripts. One of those people was me. So I made this speculative model I wanted to show you because it shows kind of the interesting flexibility of VC Editor. So this was based on the fragmented quire, a fragmented quire that was in the Kislak Center. And you can see how there's not many leaves left, but based on the leaves that there were, I could actually make out the continuation or the likely continuation of this manuscript. And kind of all three methods, I guess, were popular for teaching manuscript studies and for book conservation. Sorry, for teaching book conservation. So the making of the models was described in different ways. And I'll give you here two quotes from interviewees. So one interviewee called making models the process of creating a new object, and others spoke, for example, of reconstruction or resequencing tool, allowing the user to take the book apart, or it was also described as a sketching tool. So this interviewee, this user, describes it as a sketching tool. So they say, and then, of course, in the codicological analysis, now the VisColl came into our life. And we also like to use it more and more when we describe details of book construction. And then we also like to use it because it's a very easy tool to quickly sketch. So the second quote comes from a user who had who was working on a project that brings together kind of different fragments that are in different libraries, but used to belong to one single medieval manuscript. And they say, kind of describing what the model actually is. It's not a digital facsimile, you know, it's some kind of new thing because it's resequencing the images of leaves to build an object that doesn't exist anymore. So it's complicated, right? In general, users moved through VC Editor with ease when they were showing me how they would build their models with screen sharing. So it's quite intuitive. So it's quite intuitive to kind of, as you just saw, to enter the data and to make changes. Some things are more intuitive than others. Sometimes it also didn't work because this person, this quote is from a person, and we had to kind of wait because the internet connection wasn't great. And they said, I can't get this one to load sometimes, I guess. So if I keep loading it, but mostly I'm just getting this little broken sad face. I thought it was quite funny, actually, that this happened. It was generally, I guess, agreed that the tool offers a new way of interacting with the manuscripts between the interviewees. For some, entering and structuring the data would develop new questions about the research they were working on. So the new material digital engagement allows people to actively think through their medieval research object. So this is what some people said. One person said, it's just a model to think through, and the other said, it's a useful exercise for me for thinking about how to structure my data. There were also other people who saw VC Editor as something similar or at the same level as working out a collation by hand in sketches. So this user uses VC Editor mostly to create neat results for the presentation of the book collation in documentation. So they said, it just looks neater, you know, all your results look the same. With sketching, you actually have to do that very precisely. And of course, if something has gone wrong, it's easier to correct it. And then you don't have to erase anything. Otherwise, you get this eraser haze in your drawing, or the space between various bifolia becomes larger because you have erased the sketch of a bifolium. And you don't have to scan it separately because it's directly digital. So it's super nice to build into an interface. So it's not the same for everyone, as you can see. For some, the visualization immediately makes clear how things fit together, right? This user talks about, this user says, so this idea of taking the manuscript apart in virtual space is extremely valuable for seeing the manuscript in a different way that you couldn't see before. Especially when people were interested in the changing nature of the medieval manuscripts. So the quires that were built up out of multiple different layers of historical addition or deductions. VC Editor proves a very useful thing for the organization of data. The projects, there were a few people working on projects that involved kind of recombining single leaves into reconstruction in VisColl, or in VC Editor, sorry. This one user said, we're taking remnants and fragments of objects that of an object that doesn't exist anymore, and resequencing images of that object in a way that allows us to visualize and see something that can't exist anymore, but that once existed. It was a real object. And then this other user, they talk about the theoretical reconstruction of broken books. And they say, and what I like about it is the chance to entertain a lot of models and scenarios for reconstruction. It lets me experiment and try quickly rather than getting into the extreme details really fast. So this shows that for some users that I spoke to, the entering and analysis of data, as well as the visualization, provided a mediating structure for the production of knowledge. It was because of the digital framework that certain ideas came to the fore. And for some, the tool didn't provide more questions, but it was more an aid for making collation statements or to make their drawings look better for the presentation in documentation. It was actually really fun looking at people's VisColl accounts. Some people were very neatly organized, had a very neatly organized list of manuscripts. Others were much more chaotic. Of course, the organization of research data is heavily prescribed. VC Editor only lets you do a few things. But this is endemic to digital methods in general, because the digital environment has specific affordances. And of course, in the end, the objects that people were working on and the kind of the information that they were interested in is all pretty similar, right? It all revolves around the structure of medieval manuscripts. But at the same time, the organization was very different from person to person, showing also the ability of VC Editor to be a very flexible working environment. So it was described, the practice of modeling in VC Editor, I already said, was described like sketching. Someone literally said it's sketching, but easier, quicker, and more convenient. So describing and visualizing the book structure was sometimes also done with traditional methods like collation formula or pencil sketches, and sometimes with other software like Word or Excel. But VC Editor offers this environment that combines many ways of dealing with the material in one. So this user says, and so it sort of forces me to look at the physical character of the book in a very, very specific way. And that happens either way with VC Editor or working out the formula. So for them, it wasn't necessarily one or the other. And then this other user had a more clear preference for sketching. So they say, I think drawing does have the advantage that you really work on it manually, and creating that in that interface is a bit more distant from the original object, maybe. So VC Editor allows for this different kind of interaction. Someone described it as a kind of a puzzle to figure out. And some others described it as a kind of hands-on experience, more so than traditional methods, possibly because the traditional collation formula is seen as kind of more abstract than the modeling software. So I have another two quotes to go through. This person used VC Editor mostly for teaching students, and they talk about, they say about their students the following: yeah, because they are actively doing something. They have to click on things and think about how things fit together. And it's like a puzzle. And it all has always worked well in my classes. Some people have not liked it. Some people have liked it. But everyone has gone into it and willingly done it because it's like puzzling together, like a jigsaw puzzle almost. And it's got that kind of interactive element to it that I think works really well, certainly for teaching. And the following users said, So for me, the description of a manuscript in formula, which is very also often used to describe the collation of the manuscript, this for me is very abstract, because you have a certain kind of information, but you could not construct a manuscript with that, not in total, because there are some questions which you can't put into a formula. And this is what you can do with VC Editor. So I also really thought about, and I kind of looked at how people personalize their objects. So the VC Editor environment kind of fundamentally allows the user to shape their own object. So information can be really sparse or very detailed. It can be any information people find important, and images can be added or left out. And in the screen sharing, I really saw all kinds of things that people added or didn't add. So the experience of entering the data, so the interaction between scholar and software, seems to change the way scholars interact with their manuscripts. In a way, scholars are reshaping the medieval manuscript by making the digital object their own, which in some cases crucially leads their questions and analysis, as we've seen before. One person would create VisColl models before they would go and see the manuscript in the reading room, so that they would have a better feeling or idea for the structure of a book. So not only a tool for analysis, but also for pre-analysis, if you were. The way that people dealt with the output was very different. And I've kind of identified two kinds of outputs. The kind of definitive final result output and the ongoing projects. The VisColl model, so VisColl models that were used in kind of online environments, for example, kind of online library catalogs or documentation used for restoration and conservation practices, those were usually kind of definitive, even though obviously they still had a kind of chance to be, or kind of there was a possibility to change them. The output really was meant as a final result. And then there were many people who also saw their VisColl models as things to actively work on throughout the research process. And even sometimes when the visualizations were already published in either traditional print or online media, just like a journal article, for example, they would still, after it being published, go back and actively change the model in case new finds were made and things like that. And the way people also played with the changeability of VisColl models shows the collaborative nature of a lot of the research and of the models, the modeling. So people would share their work with colleagues to check it or to work together on a certain model. And it was often done with the share link, sometimes with the viewing mode. Logins were shared, or even when people were sharing an office, they would work on models together. It hardly ever, only one of the interviewees really exported the models into XML or the encoded models. And this person only did that because of the preservation method. But usually they just made use of the visualization of the viewing mode, and there were a lot of people who just used screenshots of the models that they created. So where for the developers it was clear that the XML models were the most important output, it was striking that the users of VC Editor were looking at something else. So I know I've been talking for a long while. I have a small last note, I guess, and then I'll go to my conclusions, because I promised that I would come back to this idea of medievalists as a community of scholars. Although it seems like we work on very specific things on our small little disciplinary islands, I'm finding out more and more how much we work together to create something new and exciting, and how much we rely on each other for help. And this also really came to the fore when I was interviewing people. Medievalists are at the forefront of digital humanities. We are the OGs of creating digital tools and to look at large data sets. I mean, the classic example is the 1940s development of the Index Domesticus. But So I feel like apart from that, digital medieval projects are all absolutely at the top of digital humanities at the moment. They're also, in a way, as we say in Dutch, houtje touwtje, so a little bit cobbled together. That is, usually they purely exist because someone had an incredible idea for a digital tool, and then they just find the right people to do it and figure out a way to make it real, obviously within kind of financial and institutional brackets, I guess. So you just reach out to the correct people with the correct knowledge and you work together. So this sense of community and collaboration between medievalists, librarians, conservators, it may not be unique in the academic and scientific world, but it certainly is something to encourage, to support, and to cherish. And with that, I come to my conclusions, which has a question mark, because I am still in the middle of analysis. I'm still kind of unsure. In the end, the purpose of this research project is to provide a reflection on what our reliance on digital method means for the study and our understanding of these ancient books. The analysis of this research has really been obviously reading what people or listening to what people say, but also reading between the lines. So how do people respond to questions? What do they associate with certain wordings and phrases, and how do they actively move through this online environment? So even if you're using VC Editor only to neaten up your drawings so there won't be any eraser haze on them, the interaction with the software is still very different than with the pencil used to sketch a collation structure. And this is what I'm interested in. Knowledge is always produced in the interaction between scholar and research object. They are mutually shaping each other. So VC Editor or VisColl is a tool that is explicitly made for the scholar to digitally model and quantify their manuscripts. It is made to create metadata, to create an environment for analysis. But it is clearly used for qualitative research as well as just plain and simple visualization and cleaning up other ways of visualizing manuscripts. So from the interviews, but also from reading through the lines and observing interviewees, it is clear that the tool forces other ways of interaction and engaging with medieval material. So tentatively, I would conclude that the development of digital tools like VisColl, but more specifically their uses, even though they may differ from the developer's intent, affects the way knowledge is produced about medieval manuscript culture and consequently about the Middle Ages. What seems clear to me is that digital tools like VisColl and VC Editor allow the medievalist or librarian or conservator to think about medieval material in a new way. The whole context of medieval manuscript studies is changing in light of digital technological advances. So we cannot say that the histories we write are not changing alongside it. Thank you for your attention. And I'm really looking forward to questions. Shall I stop sharing my screen? Is that best? I don't know. What is the best way to do questions? People just, I don't know what you normally do, Nick.
Well, I think Dot and I can, first of all, thank you so much, Suzette. That was wonderful. And I think particularly for Dot and I, but for many of us, who worked on this or with this tool, it's very interesting to hear a perspective of, a sort of outside perspective on the tool. And I think Dot and I are going to sort of help direct some of the questions. Dot, are there some in the chat that we can begin with?
Yeah, so if you have a question, you can type it in the chat and Nick or I will get it. If you would rather ask a question, you can raise your hand and we'll call on you. But there is a question from Dorothy Huff. Thank you very much for this interesting talk. I can see this as a great way to enrich our collection of digitized manuscripts, and we'll talk to our IT about this. Do you know of any library that has already done this?
I definitely do. I definitely do. Obviously, the main library that has done this is the Kislak Center, right? I mean, Dot, you can talk to this maybe a bit more, but you have in your digital record, you always have a little link that if there's a VisColl model that you've created or one of the librarians or a very, very tiny contribution by me. You can click on it and then you go to the visualization of these structures. But maybe Dot, you have something more to say.
Yeah, just that we have a program where we're creating VC editor models, and what we do is we generate output and also take screenshots, and we put it in our institutional repository and then make a link, because we can't currently like just have it sort of, that would be perfect if it was like like part of the record where you could actually see the visualization, but we're not there yet. So we're kind of working around it. I do want to mention that the University of Heidelberg, they're not using our system, but they do have, for some of their manuscripts, they have a built-in collation visualization ability, which is very cool. So they deserve props for that. But otherwise, I am not sure of anyone else's, but I think we're all happy to talk to other people about that.
We'll try and get you a link.
I'll get you a link. Yeah.
Also, if you have a technical question about VisColl, I'm sorry I didn't actually do a deep dive into VisColl, but I think Dot or Alberto are better to talk to that than I am.
I see there's a question or comment from Carrie Thomas about Bill Endress's work that you mentioned at the beginning of your talk, and I won't comment on that specifically, but I'll just say that you can look forward to Bill Endress's forthcoming article in our journal Manuscript Studies, which the fall volume will be out next month. So maybe we can look forward to reading that and getting an answer to the question.
Yeah, and
I'm a plug for the journal.
Great, I know, and yeah, he sent me his text, so I just quoted from there, but maybe it's already changed. I don't know, we'll see. But I'm looking forward to seeing the final result. Shall I just answer Carrie's question, or at least try to answer, because it's okay. Let me read it. I'll read it aloud for the people who are not reading along in the chat. I like Bill's work generally, but not sure about the definition of digitization as a scholarly intervention. Is scholarly intervention the main feature, or on that basis, does that preclude citizen science type stuff? No, but I think then we're getting into what is scholarly or what is not. I'm guessing if we're thinking about citizen science, at least for me, I would also see that as a scholarship in a way. I mean, it's still kind of working with this material in a very particular way. I'm thinking also that Bill specifically looks at scholarly intervention as more perhaps a motivating force than it in the end also all being scholarly intervention, right? A lot of my work that I've done, especially on medieval images on social media or on the internet, you can see that it begins with these beautiful digitization, but it may end in a meme. And I wouldn't call a meme scholarly, especially not when it has nothing to do with medieval content. So I'm guessing there's a lot of kind of liminality there, right? It's kind of an in-between.
We have just quickly a question about whether the session will be recorded, and yes, it has been recorded and it will be posted to our YouTube channel, although usually there's a little bit of delay of several weeks or months. And we have is it Mache Ojala in the audience who has his hand raised, so please go ahead and if you'd like to ask the question yourself.
Yeah, thank you, Suzette, and organizers for making this happen. I have a question. I'm some sort of, let's say, science and technology studies scholar, so all of this makes perfect sense to me. That's wonderful. And I really appreciate the kind of effort that you put into this kind of how people make this their own, how they breathe life into them, or like how they compare, for instance, there's kind of a little bit messy sketches and how this can clean their sketches up, and all of that makes so much sense to me. I have a little question about this kind of, as I understood from your presentation, that this kind of it's kind of easy to make these models, and you showed how to do it, and you spoke that people kind of like to do it and make them their own, like put these images in or not, or something like this. So the question is about this kind of, isn't it so that any of these physical manuscripts are now, let's say, surrounded by this kind of cloud of all those unique models on your computer, on my computer, on my old computer, on some server somewhere, that there's like a, let's say, many competing models, some of which serve your purposes, my purposes, so on. And is this an like issue in the community of like, will some of the manuscripts that are, for instance, hard to interpret and hard to model, will they get like 200 different or 2,000 different models or different versions, and this kind of the sort of question of like collaboration? Is this an issue or not? Maybe, or is this something that's like discussed within the VisColl community? Thank you.
Thanks, Masa. No. No, I don't think it's an issue. I really like this idea, right? And I'm also thinking about this idea of having a cloud or a network of kind of scholarly interpretation, but also reproductions, which is obviously something that I think about a lot. All of this is also kind of surrounding the manuscript and influencing the way we see the manuscript and deal with the manuscript, and the other way around, right? The manuscript obviously also forms these models or reproductions. VisColl, first of all, it's a very small community. People who look at manuscript structure, I mean, there's not many, and then people who specifically look at manuscript structure and also using VisColl. I mean, a lot more people are using it now because it's much more kind of easier to get into. I don't know of anyone who's working on the same things in VisColl. So in that sense, the answer is no. I'm also wondering whether it will be a problem. I don't know if I want to call it a problem, right? It's more kind of scholarly interpretation. People talk about manuscripts in different ways. If we're thinking about one manuscript that has gotten a lot of attention in scholarship, people always kind of change and talk, and there's always discussion between how people understand things, right? So it's an interesting question, but I think just in general, manuscript studies is too small. People who look at structure is even smaller, and then people who use VisColl, it's even smaller amount of people. So in that sense, we're not kind of mowing the grass before each other's feet or anything. And in that sense, there's also quite a lot of collaboration. So if someone would be working on the same manuscript as someone else, I'm pretty sure they would reach out to each other. Thanks. I'm seeing a lot of things in the chat.
There's a bit of parallel discussion, I think, going on. Okay. But we have a question from Astrid Smith, sort of related to what you've been discussing. Thank you so much for this fascinating talk. I could see the tool being extremely useful during the quality control period of digitization, when staff who may not have been hands-on are trying to figure out the structure of sometimes confusing structures and checking for missing folios, etc. Very cool possibilities. Do you find it to be an approachable platform for non-scholars?
Yes. Definitely, and what you're saying is another great, I think, would be a very good use. A lot of people that I spoke to, and so as I said, with scholars, I mean, a very broad range of people, and I don't know if non-scholars are people who are working in digitization studios, but I wouldn't call those non-scholars, to be honest. They're definitely doing the scholarly work. And I think it's very approachable. Yes. I think you probably need to know more about manuscript structure than about using a digital tool to use it, right? Yes, because I think the mistakes that are made are usually kind of more the interpretation of the structure that is going wrong rather than using the tool that is going wrong. If that answers your question.
It also maybe, so that relates to what that you were saying, what you were saying about the sort of different use cases. I mean, there's the users who are specifically looking at a particular manuscript for to solve, as I understood it, to solve a particular problem or something that's relevant to their research. There's the routine use of the routine production of collation models as a part of cataloging, and then the sort of more speculative use, the third case, of the tool. And I'm wondering if the conceptualizing, of course, collation models in a way that in the sense of cataloging is we create metadata when we catalog a manuscript, or we make observations that maybe seem like banal, like the size, the number of ruling lines, or the not just the page dimensions, but the bound dimensions and the text block dimensions, and those aren't maybe like of immediate use to us, and we don't even foresee what the use might be. But similarly, a collation model can be useful to a scholar many years from now, for some reason that we are not even aware of. I mean, if they have a folio that might fit with an existing parent manuscript, it might help them solve that. So, I think this sort of cataloging can also be speculative in that sense, right? That it's attempting to provide information for problems or questions or queries in the future that we don't even know will be asked, but we just do our best to record the information we can. So I thought that was an interesting kind of how that comes out of the sort of different use cases you presented.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm thinking about VisColl VC Editor now as a place where people use it and kind of use the entering of the data as a scholarly activity, but actually just using the models that were created by someone else I haven't really even thought about that, may also obviously be part of this a kind of extended reach of VC Editor or VisColl, if they're more introduced into library catalogs, which I would love to see. But obviously it also takes quite a lot of time to catalog.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh yeah, no, it's just to model all of these manuscripts, right? It's a difference than just copying, pasting a collation formula from an old paper catalog.
Can I ask on that theme, the sort of what your thoughts are on the kind of intellectual property or like publication piece of this? Because as you know, and as many of us are aware, there's a lot of discussion about sort of that what sort of intellectual work cataloging constitutes, or certainly what kind of credit scholars, catalogers, librarians should be receiving or not receiving, and how visible that labor should be in the catalog record, because of course catalog information is an intellectual product, but sometimes it's sort of harvested by scholars who don't cite or who aren't able to cite the person who created it. So how do you see VisColl fitting into this kind of discussion about the intellectual, not necessarily intellectual property, that sounds too legalistic, but the intellectual recognition for cataloging work?
I'm not entirely sure how I see VisColl specifically in there. I don't know if what would be really good is to have like a little kind of watermark on top of like the structure that you can export to, that it says that it gives the username, I guess, so that you can always, it's always the username included in either the encoded output or into the visualization in any way. I don't know, maybe for the next phase of development, I don't know. I'm a very big fan of having the people who are making the digital objects being cited, if it's a catalog record, if it's a digitization, if it's just photographs, cite the people, and especially also cite the year. I'm always so frustrated when I'm kind of trying to use or trying to look at digital medieval manuscripts, and I want to write this little maybe a little history about how it started and who has been working on it. It's just kind of crucial. Maybe, I mean, just, okay, on a very granular level, it's kind of crucial to know who has been working on it and why did they make certain choices. But on a bigger level, this is also just a good thing to cite so that we at least have that information, and it doesn't have to be much. It can just be a name or a username, at least something that you can look into. I don't know. But that isn't me. I'm doing research on digital tools and digital manuscripts. I can understand that a medievalist who's looking at medieval manuscripts, it's not important to their research to know who has been making these things. So yeah, I guess I'm just speaking from a very specific standpoint. Yeah.
Great. Any other have I missed anything in the chat, Dot? Is there anything anyone in the chat? I'm just scrolling back. There's a lot of sign of a very intellectually stimulating talk when there's so much chatter. Or are there any questions from any audience members?
I'm not seeing questions, but I just like Lisa's statement about kind of the lack of kind of VisColl addressing the lack of standardization in collation statements, and that a visualization is actually much more, first of all, much more easy to understand, as you've seen in the interviews. People also talk about this, but also, as Alberto says, this language barrier, right? Which can be quite a problem in library catalog records, but I like this this part of it. Master, you also want to talk about images?
Well, it's interesting. It makes me think of the Deleuze and the archaeology of the book, and these early, relatively early attempts in the, I guess, 1970s and 80s in publications to show collation diagrams. And I've always sort of wondered a little bit about how those were typeset. I don't know if anyone knows anything about that, but it's interesting because, of course, it's like difficult to typeset or to produce diagrams like that in a pre-digital age for printing. Lisa says brute force.
Yeah.
But it would be sort of interesting to include that as a kind of, and maybe people have done this, the prehistory of sort of collation diagrams, because they're I mean, you get a range. I can sort of think of a range of sort of more artisanal, sort of hand-drawn images from early publications, but often they're sort of diagrammatic, and so they must be composed somehow by a typesetter or a book designer. And you also wonder about the slippage, like if it's not the author of the text who, I mean, they might have made the formula and be directing the typesetter to make the diagram, but that sort of slippage, which of course in VisColl is no longer present because the scholar / author is the one making the diagram directly, as opposed to asking someone to make it for them. So just interesting to think of some of those like sort of slippages or gaps between, I guess, observer and maker.
Mhm. I'm thinking so. I have two thoughts. So Lisa says the earliest codicological diagram. I'm assuming this must be like some sketch in the 18th century or something. I think I don't know. This is just and also, what if the ink runs out when they're printing it, and then suddenly someone thinks, "Oh, there's a leaf missing here," and it's not. It's just a ink run out. Anyway. But it really is something that I think about a lot, not necessarily in terms of VisColl and diagrams, but I could definitely include this in my article, because I'm really interested in how digital technologies are kind of in this. They stand in a history, in kind of a long tradition of working with medieval material. Like digital medieval manuscripts stem directly from like 18th, 19th century ways of people dealing with medieval manuscripts. And often people talk about digital technologies as though it's like this. I mean, obviously it is a big change, but it's not, it doesn't come from nothing, right? And especially if you're thinking about this history of codicology and codicological writing, I think that's a very good point.
Great. Well, we're approaching 1:30 p.m. here, and I think, Suzette, it's quite late for you in Germany.
Okay.
So I think if there are no further questions, Jot, do you want to have the last word or any final comments?
I just want to say thank you. It was such a treat to like hear what people are using it for, and like how it's the same, because I am a big user of VC Editor, and like how they're using it the same as me and different, and it's just I thank you so much for everything.
I mean, thank you. I mean, this is great. I mean, obviously my whole fellowship was great. I wish I could be in Philadelphia right now, but I'm here in Bochum. I'm going to have some dinner now, I guess, with my friends, and hopefully we'll see each other soon. And thank you to all the people who came. There's so many people.
Thank you for coming. Yes.
Thanks, everyone, and we'll see you at the next online lecture.
Thanks. Bye, Alberto.
Bye.